Hi, my name is Claire Glenton from Cochrane, Norway. This is part 1 of a video where I'll be talking about ensuring a reasonable representation of the results from a Cochrane review. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about checklist items 11, 12 and 13. Have you avoided misleading presentations and interpretations of the effects? If you've used numbers to present the findings, have you used absolute numbers and labelled numbers clearly? And have you described the certainty of the evidence? So I'm going to start by focusing on problems that we often see when people present the results of a Cochrane review. And in part 2 of this video, I'll discuss some solutions. So a problem that we still see is that people pick the wrong outcomes to present. Any summary of a Cochrane review needs to focus on the most important outcomes, not the outcomes with the best or most interesting results. And this includes empty outcomes, so outcomes where you found no evidence. So if one of the main outcomes in a review is pain, you need to present this outcome, even if no data was found. In that case, you simply need to say that we found nothing. You can't leave this outcome out and move on to the outcomes that may be less important but had more interesting results. A second problem we see is that the results of a review are presented without any mention of how certain we are of these results. So this is a typical scenario where we've said that the review found that the intervention led to large improvements in, for instance, pain, which is quite an impressive result. But then way down below, they've mentioned that the certainty of that evidence was actually low. So these two pieces of information have been separated from each other, and this can change how people interpret the results. So as a rule, remember that you should always include information about the certainty of the evidence, and you should always present this information together with the information about the effect. Another problem is a focus on statistical significance. Now here's a type of sentence that we still see quite often. The treatment led to a statistically significant improvement in pain. Now that simply means that the effect is unlikely to be by chance. It doesn't actually tell you whether that improvement in pain was clinically significant. So forget about statistical significance when you're presenting the results of the review and focus on the significance of this result to the patient instead. Another problem is that people still aren't very good at explaining the scales that were used to measure the outcome. So here's a fictitious example. There was a 2-point reduction in pain measured on the Hattie-Fnatt scale. Well, I have no idea what the Hattie-Fnatt scale is, so I have no idea if a 2-point reduction is a big reduction or a small reduction. So if you're referring to scales, tell people how big the scale is, whether it goes from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, and make it clear whether a high score or a low score is a good thing. Another problem, which is still very common, is confusing evidence of no effect with no evidence of effect. Now here's a typical statement. There is no evidence to support the intervention. But does this mean we know it doesn't work, or we don't know if it works? Many people find this confusing and they aren't completely sure what it means. So here's a story from the Daily Mail newspaper, and it says that cough syrup is a waste of time. So cough syrup doesn't work. Experts reveal popular treatments that don't make a difference. And then further down it says there is little or no evidence to support its use. Actually, what the review found was that we don't know if it works. But the newspaper has misinterpreted the statement little or no evidence. Now this is an important misunderstanding. Saying a treatment doesn't work is a very different result from saying we don't know if it works. So we really need to think about how we are presenting this. The last problem I'm going to mention is that people sometimes formulate findings as recommendations. But the aim of a Cochrane review is to provide the best available evidence. It's not to recommend what people should actually do. So we should not be presenting recommendations. We should simply be telling people what the evidence is. Now this list is from Cochrane's training module on common errors. And you can pause the video here and read these statements and see if you can see any that you don't think we should be using. So this was my judgment. And if you've read the statements, you will have seen that this is not always obvious. And I was unsure about number 4, for instance. But this is something you need to think about. Could you be interpreted as giving a recommendation? So those were some common problems. And in part 2 of this video, I'm going to be talking about a solution to a lot of these problems, which is the use of the grade narrative statements. This video is one of a series of videos that are based on Cochrane's dissemination checklist. And the easiest way to find this checklist is to search for it online. Thanks for watching.